fun.
Well, Cathy, thank you so much for being guest speaker for our Rewilders community. We're thrilled to have you.
So thrilled. It's always a joy to speak to you, Cathy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, so we were just saying it's been way too long since we've connected.
I know. So many fond memories hanging out down your way. Just
yes, exactly.
Having a good time. So it's a pleasure to see you guys again. Really.
Yeah.
It's lovely having you. And for those of you who don't know Cathy, we'll be including some information about her in the email, but she's one of the original teachers who studied and learned directly from Sydney Banks and has done amazing work in so many different areas of the world with individuals, with organizations in the prison system, the full gamut. It seems you've done everything. And there's just such a rich amount of experience that you've had in doing the work in all those different venues. But when Angus and I were reflecting on where we thought we'd like to go with this interview, we wanted to start out by seeing if you'd be willing to share your story of how you came across Sydney Banks and this understanding, because I thoroughly enjoyed it when you shared it with me years ago.
It is a funny story. And just to let folks know, I was really lucky because I live here in San Jose, California, and Bob Garner, who was over the Drug and Alcohol Drug Services Department here in Santa Clara County. So it's this huge program that sets up all the treatment throughout the county. And he decided to invite somebody to talk about the principles because he had been exposed from Roger Mills somewhere in the Midwest. Anyway, to make a long story short, I showed up. It was this at the convention center, not far from where I live now, about close to 100 people. And the only reason why I was there is I was trying to get a job with someone who worked in that department where I could do my internship and get paid to get my master's degree in psychology. So I'm there because I want to impress this woman, so she'll give me the job. I didn't even know what it was called. All I know is Mark Howard and Joe Bailey were up on the podium, and I'm sitting there, and my first thought was, wow, there are a lot of people here. I can slip out. Annette, I made it. And she said, oh, great, I'm glad you're here. And that would impress her. But because there were so many people, I could slip out and she wouldn't even know. So that's how I showed up to my first event of listening to the principals. So I'm sitting there, and I sat where I was close to the back door. And I'm sitting there kind of half watching what's going on up front on the stage and kind of looking at the clock, looking at the door. What should I wait for a break? I mean, I'm literally trying to calculate when I could, because I had so much going on in my life. I was an intern in school. I had a job. I was a wife. I was a mother. It was crazy. So I'm thinking, I don't have time to sit here for 4 days. It was a 4-day program. So meanwhile, something keeps catching my ear. You know, Joe Bailey kept talking about clearing your mind and something about your mind. And I'm sitting there like, what do you mean clearing my mind? If I cleared my mind, forget it. My life would fall apart. I mean, I'm sitting there like, what are they talking about? But for some reason, I stopped looking at the door and I'm listening a little bit more. And something caught me. And all of a sudden, probably about 11:30, it literally hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh, kind of like everything's inside out, not outside in. That hit me. Just like a, whoa. It's like I went down the wormhole. And I was sitting next to somebody who I knew, actually, he was my supervisor for this project. I was like, John, and he's sleeping. He's like, John, wake up. Wow, what? You're missing it. This is it. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, John, this is it. And he's like, whatever. And then, he just goes back to his little nap. And that's when my life changed. That was it, the defining moment. So I'm glad I didn't leave. Now I go forward with this. I'm doing a job, a research job to pay myself through graduate school, doing data collection in the jail system. We're trying to find out what drugs are being used out on the street. So we would interview newly arrested people to find out what drugs are you guys using out there. They call it the drug use forecasting program. It was a great job because it was like 10 at night to 3 in the morning. which fit in perfect with my crazy
Oh my
schedule.
goodness.
So because I was doing that and learning the principles, it dawned on me when I was on the women's side, they were freaking out on the phone about their kids, and there was a lot of emotion and all that. And I thought, wow, maybe this would help them.
Mm.
Because I'd been learning about it for about 3 months, and it dawned on me, well, maybe this will help them. So my colleague and I, we wrote up a proposal, we got funded, then we look at each other. Now what do? We don't know how to teach, but we did anyway. And so for 9-10 months, we were in the jails teaching the principles to the inmates.
Mm.
Now, most of my learning was coming from Roger Mills. I heard other people speak, but it's mostly Roger Mills. And this is way before Zoom. So you pretty much either travel to hear somebody. So we were listening to George Pransky up in San Francisco. He was doing a day thing. And he says, oh, by the way, Sydney Banks will be speaking in Hawaii on these dates. And Faye, my colleague, and I, we looked at each other like, oh, who is Sydney Banks? And he said, yeah, these are the dates, blah, blah. And then George left because he had to take a flight. So we're like, well, who is this guy? And because of my experience getting involved in New Age stuff, and they always turned out to be, really, I thought, oh, are you kidding me? There's some weird guy behind this. And they're going to, and what Faye and I were freaking out because we literally set up a department in this. We put money on it. It was our reputations. And we were calling it health realization.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I'm sitting there like, oh, we're in trouble. This is really bad. And so they announced he's going to be speaking in Hawaii. So I looked at Faye, I said, we have to go over there and check him out. She goes, what do you mean? We're going to go to Hawaii? I said, well, worst case, we'll find out he's some weirdo guru flaky guy, but at least we'll get a trip to Hawaii out of it. But we've got to scope this guy out. And Roger was out of town, so we didn't get a chance to talk to him. So we fly out to Hawaii, and he's speaking at this hotel on Oahu, one of these big, tall hotels, no windows. It was kind of lecture style hall where the seating is kind of at an angle. And they have a special chair for him. And then he sits in the chair, and then the Hawaiian lady comes out and does her little thing. And he's got the lei on. I thought, oh, this is worse than I thought. This is really worse than I thought. And the whole room was quiet, and everybody was, to me, they looked like zombies. And I looked at Faye and said, oh, this is really bad. And so he takes a while to get started. And finally he looks up and says, would somebody ask me a question? And to get him going. So somebody asked him about, could you tell us about your experience? And so he shares whatever he shared about that, because the story is always different every time he shares it. So he shares that, and I'm thinking, oh, this really is weird. Okay, we're in big trouble now. And then he starts talking about the principles. And as he's talking about the principles, I'm like, well, that's what we're teaching the inmates. Okay, all right. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we're saying. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, at least, he's saying the same thing we're saying. Can you imagine me saying that? It's saying the same thing I'm saying. And then this woman raises her hand, and she launches into, she has this friend who has this physical thing, and it's this and it's that. And she kind of goes on for a while, and she says, so Sid, what should I tell her to do? And he got really quiet. And I thought, well, here we go. Here comes the woo-woo. And he looks at her and he says, well, I think she should go see a doctor. And I'm like, okay, I think we're good here. I think this is getting better. So he calls a break, and of course people swarm around him, and I'm just standing by my chair. Everybody's rushing down there, and I'm just standing there like trying to process what's real and what's not, and is this really true and all that. And he cuts through the crowd of people, and he starts walking up the aisle, and I'm thinking, oh, he doesn't know there's no door up here. He's trying to get out. And I'm thinking, oh, he's going to go all the way there. You have to go out. It's at the front. No, he's walking towards me. He comes walking up. He comes over to me. And I'm like, what's going on here? He said, listen, I want you to come to Dunsmuir. And I'm like, okay. And then he turns around and he leaves. And I'm like, what does that mean? So he comes back, he does another session, time to break for lunch. And again, he broke away from the crowd. He said, no, really, I want you to come to Dunsmuir. And then he just walks away. And so I find Roger. I said, what? He keeps saying he wants me to go to Dunsmuir. What is he talking about? And why haven't we heard about him? I mean, I'm just going off on Roger now. He said, oh, we're having a special event up in on Victoria Island at this resort. They're bringing the banking folks with Roger's community folks to share, the community folks to share what's happening in their communities with these banking people. I don't know what the point was. And he said, oh, so he wants you to be there. I said, well, that's what he keeps saying. All right, then you'll be there. I'll make sure you get up there. I'm like, okay, well, he heard about my work in the jail. Roger told him and that had been his dream for years, that this would get into the prisons, and nobody was doing it. Now I'm just doing my thing, and he finds out about it, and that was it for him. That's how I met Sydney Banks.
Wow.
Checking him out, making sure he's not some weird guy, making sure that he's saying what we're saying. I mean, that's how I met him. And after that, he couldn't say enough about, taking this into the prisons. And we actually got him down here into the jail, and we got 165 inmates together under one roof. And because it was a big deal having that many inmates together, and men and women together, they had to have extra correctional officers. And I had a dear friend who's a politician. And when they found out she was coming, because she knew about him, because I'd worked with her individually, I said, well, he's going to be speaking, but unfortunately, you're going to have to go into the jail to hear him. She said, okay, I'll be there. Well, then when they heard she was going to be there, then the commander on down, they all show up.
Wow.
I walk in and I'm like, who are all these people? I'm just bringing Sid to talk to these inmates. He comes in and he sees all the people, and he starts walking to the back of the room, and he walks out this door, and I have to chase him because you can't just wander, around the grounds. And I said, Sid, wait, and I'm outside the building with him. I said, Sid, you can't go that far. And he turns around, he has tears streaming down his face.
Wow.
Are all these people learning the principles? I said, yes, these are the only ones that they would let out. There's another 1,000 that are learning these principles. Yes, Sid. And he was so blown away with that. So I get him back, because at first I'm thinking he's, having a medical issue or something. So I get him back in, and the politician, because I did one session with her, and she just came in like this defeated person, and she walked out like reconnected again. So she says, I want to introduce him. I said, go for it. And she's very charismatic. She used to work with Cesar Chavez. She's part of Blanca Alvarado. She's very well known in the community. So she gets in front of the group and she says, Sydney Banks, I want to thank you for healing my community. Thank you for healing me. And that's how she kicked it off.
Wow.
And after he's talking, and there was a buzz in the room when he was finished. The uniforms, half of them had tears in their eyes. I mean, they're just there to keep order, and they get impacted. And they're like, wow, thank you for bringing him. I mean, they were just totally impacted. And of course, the inmates wanted to spend more time with him. And so I asked the officers, there's a special group that we work with. They want to stay. They said, okay, but only, like 20 minutes. And they said, so Sid, do you ever get angry? Did you use drugs? I mean, they asked him human questions. And he answered from his humanness. And he would say, yeah, I get angry, but because I know what it really is, it doesn't last very long. It doesn't last. But yeah, but you've got to know what anger really is. I mean, and I'm just watching this. And so I'm so grateful to it by accident. And it turned out, well, Sid was actually saying what we were saying, which is so hysterical. And that was my experience of Sid. And the thing that used to kind of drive me crazy is every time we'd have conferences, he'd want to talk about the inmates, or we actually had videos of the inmates. And I said, no, Sid, people are coming to hear you. no, they need to hear the inmates. No, they need to, and that he was so big on that. He was so, and so many times he'd come up to me and, just say, listen, I know you're in the trenches. I know how difficult it is. And, when we go to these things, we pay to hear him speak. And I'd always write a check. He'd come, he rips the check and he gives it back to me. I said, well, Sid, and he said, no. So that was my experience of Sydney Banks. And he would tell corny jokes, but in the next breath would look at me and say, now, Cathy, you don't know. You're right. I don't know anything. But you keep doing what you're doing. You keep sharing from what you see for yourself, and you keep doing that. And he would just see, and he didn't care how people shared. He just saw the result of it. That's all he saw. He saw the result, and he could tell, who was having impact, who wasn't. And he was so supportive of me and the work that I was doing. I to this day, I'm so grateful, and I miss him so much. So that's my experience of Sydney Banks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Can I have a question,
Go
actually,
ahead.
and this might I know there's part of me feels like I'm a bit apprehensive because it might sound like a stupid question, but maybe not.
Nothing's a stupid
but I have a lot
question.
of clients who deal with anger issues. So gosh, I would have loved to be there in that room when Sid answers that question, what anger really is. So, whatever you heard and however you would answer that question, I think, is it okay to
Of
ask that? I
course.
just
Oh,
I just think
absolutely.
it's something that I come up against a lot, and I'd
Yeah.
love to get your wisdom and maybe some of Sid's on that front.
Well, it's so simple, actually. And of course, I've worked with people who are locked up in prisons, San Quentin prison, high secure units, guys who've done really bad stuff. We have a videotape of the inmates speaking, and some of them have red shirts on. That means they've killed another human being.
Wow,
So
they've actually have them wear a red shirt.
Oh yeah, they have
Wow.
them identified. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you're a gang member, you're put in a special unit, you wear a brown shirt, or if you've abused a child, you wear a brown shirt. So
My
yeah, they
goodness.
have a color code.
Do they still have that today?
Yes, they still
Wow.
have that today. So, but in terms of anger, so you can just assume when I work with folks who are locked up in jail, anger may be one of the issues that they're in there for. So, and many of them told me this, especially in the domestic violence area, they're mandated to go to a domestic violence program for a year. Okay. And it's pretty much a cognitive approach. And many of them, after they learn the principles, and we're not even talking about anger now, we're just talking about generically about how the nature of thought and the nature of how principles work. And they say to me, Cathy, these other programs, they make me worse. They make me more angry. And they said, well, why is that? And so I had to help them understand the nature of thought, meaning if you have a lot of thinking in general. So I think of think of a water pitcher, and a water pitcher is filled to the brim, and you know how water can kind of hover. Okay. So a lot of us are walking around filled to the brim of thought. We're just in it. Now, how that manifests, it could 50,000 different ways. But all it takes is if you add one more drop into that pitcher, what happens to the water? It just spills over. Okay. So that's all anger is we're walking around in a ton of thought and we don't know it. And the guys would say, Cathy, I don't understand this. 1 minute I'm normal, and the next minute I'm almost killing my wife or my girlfriend. How does that happen? And I talk about the nature of thought. It's when you're in it to the brim, and that's normal for you. We do really well with that. We can kind of hang out in that and be used to that. But then that one little extra thought comes in and it just kicks off. Now, for some people, the little extra thought comes in and they start, eating everything in sight, or one little extra drop comes in and they start cleaning their house obsessively, or see how it spills out. And that's the role of consciousness. it gives us the physical, emotional experience of our thinking.
Mm.
And so many times, if you live in a violent environment, or if that's the culture, it's kind of like, well, that makes sense. That's how life should be. So that little extra thought just contributes to all the thought you've had already.
Mhm.
And I used to wonder myself, because when I was married, I used to be married, and out of the blue, I would go into a rage.
Mm.
And I thought, I'm a normal, reasonable person, but out of the blue, and it was bad. And it's a good thing there was never a gun in the house or anything, but I would start throwing things around, or like at the time, my husband was a tennis player, diehard tennis player. And we'd have a fight over the phone. I'm at home and he's at work. We're fighting, and I hang up and I get his tennis racket and I cut it. I cut his tennis racket. And I'm like, oh, that felt good. It was just like, I know that sounds bizarre, but the one little extra thought, and I cut the tennis racket. And then, of course, then I'm driving to the tennis shop and having it restrung. And I did this a number of times. And the guy at the tennis shop, he said, well, maybe we should do a different tension. Maybe he's hitting the ball too hard. I'm like, no, keep it the same. But I didn't understand it. I was a reasonable person.
Mm.
Why is this happening to me? Even getting a master's in psychology, I still, why does this happen to me? And when I learned the nature of thought, I'm like, I'm walking around in a ton of thought about anything. Doesn't even have to be angry thought. It's just, you can only sustain so much, and it's going to go somewhere. So you don't need to focus on doing anything with it. You just need to appreciate the fact of it, the nature of it. And so as the guys got that, one of the units they brought me into, the reason why they brought me into it was the high security unit. They called it Thunderdome. There was so many fights.
Mm.
They had to
Wow.
keep them locked down a lot and only let out 3 at a time. I mean, it was a nightmare.
Mm.
And the commander calls me and he said, listen, I don't know how you feel about this, but we'd like you to go into this unit. And they're not getting anything, no classes or anything.
Mhm.
I said,
Wow.
yeah, when do we start? Now, when I came in, you could cut the tension with a knife. You could feel everybody's on edge, the correctional officer, you could
Mhm.
just feel the tension. And so when we first came in, and that's an amazing story too, but when we first came in, they were really tight. Okay. And then and this was with Miss Beverly, she and I are doing this group together. And as we spent time with them, you could feel them, you just feel the difference. Their minds lightened up in general. We didn't focus on anger. We just talked about the nature of the principles and get to know them and whatever we did. And the correctional officers are like, because they didn't like us being in there because it put them at risk.
Mm.
They didn't like letting them out and be together and all that. So the fighting disappeared. 0 fights.
Wow.
Mm.
Then the officers are like, listen, we have this one guy that we're not letting out for your class because he really is bad. But we're thinking maybe he would benefit from your class. And I said, sure, just so that I know, I can reach you. But the thing is, the inmates protect us. They're going to protect me way before the COs.
Mm.
So, and then they started getting guys in there because the COs noticed the change,
Mhm.
and it made their job safer.
Yeah.
And then down the line, I ended up doing a training for the correctional officers. But the bottom line is, all anger is we're just walking around in a ton of thought and we don't know it. We just don't know it. And some of us have that flavor of that added drop. And so the less meaning you make of it. Now, guys are locked up for doing things out of anger because they don't know what's going on. They have not a clue.
Mhm.
I'll never forget one time I was waiting for the same group to come in. And I was in the room that I teach in, and this guy just one guy was in there. I said, oh, are you coming to our class? Because he was a new guy. He said, no, they're getting ready to transfer me to prison. Because usually from Santa Clara County, once they get sentenced, then they ship them up to San Quentin. I said, oh, okay. And he said, listen, could I ask you a question? And I said, well, sure. And he said, I know this sounds like a stupid question, but I don't know why I keep coming back to prison.
Mm.
And I said, oh, okay. He said, and people laugh at me when I say that. People think think that I'm just like a joke or something, but I really don't understand why I keep coming back here. And I said, oh, I know, I can see why you don't understand. I get that. He said, really? I said, oh yeah, absolutely. And I did just a mini, how he's operating in this intangible, invisible thing, and he doesn't know it.
Mm.
I just sort of said something really like that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I can do my sentence at peace with myself. You have no idea how that's helped me, because I felt like I've been such a failure, and I didn't know that.
Mm.
Nobody's ever told me that. And he said, thank you so much. And then they came in with the chains to haul him out of there.
Mm.
Seriously, I said, well, good luck. I found out, I asked the guy, how long, how much time did he get? He's 10 years. He's getting ready to do a 10-year stretch.
Mm.
But he will now do the 10-year stretch kind of like in a whole different place. He got hit
Yeah.
in that small little interchange.
It's amazing.
But the fact that he asked me, for some reason, he's getting ready to be, shipped out. Could you answer this question for me? And I'm telling you, I'll never forget that. I haven't shared that story ever.
It's beautiful.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So people can get a hit off of having a knowing about how their mind works to help them understand like what anger is. So usually if people have anger issues, I don't focus on the issue. If they tell me about it, I'll ask them, so I'll understand it better. And then, somehow say, okay, well, let's put that over here. And just let's look at how the whole system works in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can go revisit that and see how that fits in. That's usually what I try to do, is because if people try to hear you through the lens of their issue, it makes it harder for them to hear it, because they're trying to make sense of it. Whereas you want them to, all right, here's your issue over here, but let's hear me stand alone. Just in general, how all human beings have all kinds of feelings, whether it's anger or anxiety or all the different feelings. So let's look at, well, how does that happen? And then more often than not, they kind of go, oh, now I get it. And I said, now you heard something, it went in, that's all you don't need to rethink this. You don't need to try not to be angry. You just want to understand how it comes about. And that's usually what I do with folks, like whether it's anxiety or eating disorder, whatever it is, it's always the same. It's just, we have different flavors of how, consciousness gives us different flavors of how it manifests. Like I would get really, my flavors, I get really hyper and urgent, and I think ahead, like I'm thinking ahead and I'm missing what's in front of me. That's my flavor. Some people get anxious. Some people shut down. Some people, we all have what we do. And it's more just appreciating that that's all it is.
Yeah.
But what's behind it is all the same. So my full picture is the same as another guy's full picture who ends up killing somebody. See, they're one and the same, but how it manifests, if you don't know what the deal is, then you're at the mercy of that full picture. And most of the time after the fact, they really don't understand why that happened.
Yeah.
They don't get it.
Yeah.
Or I don't get it. Because I used to, why does that happen to me? Well, when I heard this, I'm like, oh, now I understand.
Yeah.
Now I understand.
And what I hear you saying, Cathy, is that as people understand that, their picture naturally gets less full.
That's it. And it's not something you work towards. It's kind of an after the fact thing. So for me, when I'd have every now and then out of the blue, I'd have that surge. And as I have the surge, first of all, I'm like, oh man, I get surprised that it's still happening. But then I realized, oh, well, I know what that is. So I may still get it, but it's my relationship to it is night and day different.
Yeah.
It's night and day different.
Yeah.
But it's the understanding. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And it doesn't, when it does surge, it doesn't fuel your behavior in the way that it used to do with those tennis rackets.
That was so funny. And one time I threw everything. He's totally into sports. And so one day I threw every sport thing, golf clubs, baseball stuff, tennis stuff. I just threw them out all the windows. They're all over the lawn, right? And he comes home from work. He sees us. He goes down. My sister lives down the street. He said, you have to go up there and deal with her. I can't deal with it anymore. And my sister comes up. She's like, what is wrong with you? I had my moment. But the funny thing is, she has the same issue. And one day I was with her. This is, after I'd learned the principles, and I was with her at her house with another sister. I'm the oldest of 10, so I have like 4 sisters. So we were eating dinner, and her husband was away. He was doing something, and he said, "Yeah, don't bother dinner for me because I'm going to eat with the guys or whatever." So he comes home, and we're finished dinner, and there's an extra couple of hamburgers on the plate. He said, "Hey, if anybody's not eating those, could I have one of those hamburgers?" And she went off on him. You said you didn't want to have dinner. And I mean, she launched into the rage thing. And my sister Alice and I are like, whoa, he just asked for a hamburger. And then I thought, oh, that's exactly what would happen to me. It was totally irrational, but that drop of water.
Yeah.
As soon as he said, oh, could I have that extra hamburger? Boom. And she was off to the races. And she's the sweetest, most lovely person. But man, when that kicked in, I'm like, and I kind of knew the deal. My other sister, she freaked out. Like, what just happened? What's wrong? I said, well, Lucy had a moment. She had a moment. But if you don't understand what that is, that will continue to happen. That will continue to happen. And for her, it was just her poor husband got the brunt of that. But for other people, they could end up killing another person or doing harm to another. And then there's domestic violence or whatever. And so we've taken this into domestic violence courses. My colleague, Linda Ramus, she taught this in the domestic, even though they required to be have a certain program. She was pointing them to the principles, and the guys told her, this makes sense. And whereas this other stuff, they need to know it's making a lot of us worse.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
the
because
court
it's adding
mandates
more water into the picture.
That's it. Exactly.
Yeah.
But the courts mandate it. There's no, they won't change the program. It's in cement. And so Linda would just sort of go kind of under the radar. Well, as you know.
Sometimes you have to do what you have to do, right?
Right, that's right.
And also I want to say on the flip side, like when you're talking about your sister that freaked out, when your other sister freaked out, it's like when you're with somebody that's having that reaction, when you understand what it is, it doesn't impact us in the same way. Our nervous system stays regulated because we understand what's going on. That's it. And it's not who they are.
Yeah. And people, the guys, it's funny, I haven't been teaching the inmates in years, but one time a guy showed up in our group in this high secure unit, and he was a what do you call him, a white supremacist kind of guy. And he comes in, and half the guys are Hispanic, half the guys are Asian, and then he comes in, and these are gang guys too, so they're no angels either. But this guy comes into the group, and you could feel his impact, and the tattoos and the shaved head and all that. And my first, I was, ooh, okay. I don't know if I'm ready for this one. I had to kind of take a step back, and he actually, no, it wasn't him. I take that back. It was another guy who came in who was unhinged. He was he was acting out. He'll be sitting there all of a sudden, start yelling at people, and really like a live wire. I mean, just really unstable. And the guys are moving away from him. And so he's really kind of ramping up. And I go towards him. in complete calm. Sir, what is it you're trying to say? And he looked at me and he said, well, I forget what he said to me, but whatever he said to me, you know, I heard, I said, oh, okay. So is this frustrating you? He said, yeah. And he just,
Mm.
so, you know, we continued the class. The next week I came in and he wasn't there anymore, which I was disappointed because, you know, he's the one I wanted to be in the class. Well, they had to move him for another reason. And the guy said, now, Cathy, how did you do that? And I said, what do you, well, and they asked about how I was with him because they were, and these are tough guys, and they were moving away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, I said, the more intense it is out here, the more present I want to get. It's like, that's my defense.
Mm.
That's my defense. Now, he might have been beyond the pale, and then I'd have to call the CO in.
Right.
And I'd have to tell you guys, hey, hold him and get this. So yeah, if it got to that point, I will make the call. So I'm not just going to let him run all over you or me or you, but I usually go there first. And he never gets that. People come at him with their own intensity to get him to stop, which gears him up even more. And so we got to talk about, again, the nature of thought and what you just said, Rohini, about you're in the face of that, that's all you have.
Right.
You know, and you know, I've told people I've mentored here locally, every now and then somebody acts out in a training program that's just a normal group of people. And every now and then, and they, you know, they try to be nice. I said, no, there are times that you've got to call 911 and call the cops. I mean, you know, there's a point where this is beyond your scope. You call the cops, or somebody wanted to drive home and they're drunk as a skunk or whatever. I said, you've got to take action. So this presence doesn't mean, oh, you're just going to be calm and they're going to, no, it'll help you know what's required.
Yeah.
What's
Exactly.
required as opposed to, and so I've had colleagues where, you know, they don't see it and things get out of control, or they have a client who's clinically depressed, who's suicidal, and they don't see it, and they're trying to help them see that it's their thinking or whatever. I'm like, no. There are times when you've got to see what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And so, but you're right, you have that within you to navigate what's needed. But 90% of the time, that will definitely impact the situation. That's where your safety is, as far as I'm concerned.
And that safety is when you're saying like that presence, it's a form of, it's like you're neutral. There's no judgment in that. You're not meeting them in judgment or trying to control or manipulate. And that to me always adds gasoline to the fire. But what you're describing is something really different, which is like an incredible inner neutrality.
And they feel the difference. They would say to me and my colleagues, you guys are different. We have other people, see other parts of the jail, they were in other programs. And they said, we know people are trying to help us, but it's like this.
Yeah.
But you guys are like this. They feel the difference. I said, yeah, we're all in this together. And I've told them straight up, I'm not here to help you improve yourself. I'm not here to help you not do, to prevent you from coming back to jail. I'm not here for that. You have all the wisdom that you need in you already. And Beverly was brilliant at that. She told them straight out, you are not broken. You have as much wisdom as the president of the United. I mean, she would just go there with them. And they're like, nobody, I mean, some of them would go into tears because nobody has seen that in them. And she saw that in them. And I'm watching this like, what is she doing? I wasn't, and then I realized over time, oh, she's seeing the certainty and the fact that they have what they need already. No exception.
Yeah.
When I finally figured that one out. But first we have to see it for ourselves before we can see it in them. And I watched her do that. And I'm like, wow. And it would just change the whole feeling in the room. And again, nobody has ever given, that's a gift. That's a spiritual gift to give to another human being.
Yeah.
And most of them have never, maybe their moms, you know, or their grandmas or a dad, but more often than not, they've never received that unconditional love. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And I got to really see that and watch that from Beverly. Yeah. I'm like, whoa. I'm like, how did she do that? And then I realized, oh, how she does Beverly, but we all have this capacity, and I do Cathy, and you guys do you. And but if you have that certainty that you have it and they have it, that's 98% of it.
Yeah. And that brings me back to something that you were saying before we started the recording about how Sydney Banks was really clear that there was no hierarchy. And that was something that was really instilled, I think, in all of the teachers. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, he would get angry.
Talking about anger.
No, seriously, he would get angry because I think, you know, we're human. We're all human, and we learn something and we feel like, oh, well, I know what this is and I'm going to be good at this. And now I'm making money at this. And he saw that happening and he got angry. And one time I was invited to hear him speak with a small group of folks that I'm like, oh, wow, I'm with all these important people. So I'm like sitting at the edge of my chair. We're in this conference room up in Vancouver. It was a dreary day. I remember it was cold and dreary, and we're in this room and I am so excited just to be in the room. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm sitting kind of across from him, and he had a table mic. And so we're all waiting for him to start. And he says, okay, well, Cathy, I want you to tell this group how to really teach the principles. And I'm like, what are you talking about? No, Sid, I think you're the one who should talk. And he shoves the microphone across the table. And I'm like, oh, shoot, he really means this. And I'm like, well, and I have not a clue what I said. He said, now she knows how to do this and you need to listen to her. And I've been doing it, barely a year. And that he wanted people to realize nobody has a corner on this. Nobody has a corner. And because he was getting angry that people are still in their egos and they're still blah, 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 whatever. And I was traumatized after that. Jim Marshall was there. I don't know if you know Jim Marshall. He was part of the group. He's a big ex-football player. The Vikings, which team is the Vikings? Michigan, Minnesota Vikings. And he was always known as Wrong Way Marshall because he was a defensive guy, but he ended up with the ball and he ran, but he ran the wrong way and scored for the other team. So they call him Wrong Way Marshall. Big, huge guy. Well, he was there and he had a great relationship with Sid, and he was working with gang kids and trying to get kids out of the gang and all that. And so I looked at him, looked at me, I said, I don't know about you, Jim, but I'm going to the bar. He said, yeah, I think he and I went straight to the bar. I don't know what that was, but we got to go to the bar. And Sid would get very frustrated because and that's why he would say, if you think you know what it is, it isn't. He would always say, if you think you know what it is, it isn't. Meaning you can only reflect on how you've experienced this, but at any given moment, and I've had inmates time jump me who became my teachers. And there's a couple of stories where they time jump, meaning their understanding just went from 0 to 300. And I'm like, okay, they're teaching me now. I'm learning from them because there's no form that this comes. We're speaking to something formless and spiritual. And so how could there be any kind of hierarchy in the spiritual world? I mean, it's like a contradiction.
Hierarchy and formless. I don't think so.
It just doesn't, but yet that's where the human mind wants to go. Like I've done this and I've done that, or this and I know that. And we've been, there are places where you do have to acquire knowledge to be an MD doctor and be a surgeon. I want them to have a hierarchy that they've put in their time and practice. So, but in the spiritual realm, that does not exist.
Mhm.
And even with surgeons, it's still the spiritual realm that's going to allow that to happen also. So it's, it's not like one separate from the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there's no such thing as a hierarchy. Absolutely not. No. And he hated that. He hated that. He did not want to be put on a pedestal. And again, he would always say, well, it's in you. What I see and hear, you have the same thing. He's very clear about that. And we had a dear friend, she was a colleague, her name's Pam. And we were at one of Sid's talks, and on break, she goes up to him. She tells us she did this, and we disowned her as a friend after this. She goes up to Sid. She goes, so why you and not me? Like, why did you have the experience and I didn't? And Sid goes, I have no idea.
Yeah.
You're right. I could have been you. I don't know why. And he used to say to me, Cathy, I don't know why this happened to me. I would be saying words and I had to go look up the words because I didn't even know what they meant. Words were coming, He said, I don't know why this happened. And so she said, yeah, what? I said, you said that to him? We were having dinner or something. She goes, well, yeah. And I said, Pam, we don't know you anymore. We're not your friends anymore. Like, we were so astounded, but he liked that. He was like, she was very straightforward and he likes that. He hates people, mushy and asking him the meaning of life and all this crazy stuff. He was so cute with her. But yeah, that's what she did. Like, how come you and not me?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, but guess what? It could be you, like, now.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Cathy, it's been wonderful spending time with you. Just really, and I love that you asked that question about
Yes.
anger.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you. I wanted to say, it kind of makes me think how I have heard people complain about when we might go to a seminar. It's like, oh, there's all these new people there. It's going to be so rudimentary. And I was like, I'm thrilled that there are new people here because they're going to ask questions that I want it repeated again and again. And I think, you took it to a deeper level for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's no
really
see that when I do a training, I always start with, especially if there's a mixed group, I talk to the people who've been around the principles for a while. I say, okay, now here's the deal with you guys. I want you to literally put everything you think you know, like, on the back burner, like just clear your mind of that stuff. And for those of you who are brand new, hey, don't worry about it. Just, if you could just be with me, as best you can, that's all that's required. But I'm going to tell you, it's harder for the new folks. The older folks.
Yeah.
You guys have a better advantage than the old folks.
Yeah.
And that helps calm the new folks down. But also I'm on alert with the old folks because and I said, I'm teaching what I teach. And right now, at any given moment, I could have my own insight as I'm speaking to you, or you could be saying something to me. So this is a collaboration. This is not like, I have all these years and you don't. I said, I'm always waiting to hear something from somebody else. And that's what this is about. So
yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
It's like that quote you said. It's like, if you think you know, you don't.
That's it.
Yeah.
You think you know,
and
you
over
don't.
and over again. You have
And
to
over
keep
and over again.
remembering, I don't know.
And Sid would say, Cathy, you don't know. And I'm like, it's because he's being corny and he reminds me of my dad, who's very Irish and tells the corny jokes. I'm like, oh my God, it's like sitting with my father right now. And then out of the blue, he goes into this depth and you're like, whoa, okay. I sit up straighter. Okay, something's happening here. Right. And he has such compassion and such understanding for all the people doing this work. I mean, he knew what people were doing and he totally supported and appreciated that. He knew that we were all, dealing with the world and how tough it was because, we are speaking to something formless.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, that's beautiful.
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, thank you.
That flew by.
Yes,
My pleasure.
I'm going to pause the recording. Hang on a second here.